Hey, salute to everybody. This is my first live stream since really coming back into the West. Been doing the snowbird thing for a little while, so been out of the country for a little while. But as normal, you come back into the West. You see these interesting discussions and conversations that's still going on. So let me give this chat a little chance to populate. So peace and blessings to everybody. And one of the most interesting characters today, in my opinion, is good old Scott Galloway. It's interesting about Scott that I find so fascinating is obviously he provides a lot of useful information, but most of it's based on half truths. He really don't want to deliver the cold hard truth because we live here in a gynocracy in America and in the West in general. And anything that offends women or offends the balance of things can make you extremely unpopular. You can be labeled a misogynist. You can be blackballed from many conversations and discussions. You can be labeled so many nasty things by telling the truth, the whole truth, not the watered down version of the truth, as to not offend women or to offend, uh, you know, the greatest society and be outcast or kept from the table of discussion. So I find that interesting with guys like Scott Galloway because he knows the truth. So I see podcasts like this with these types of conversations, and I find it fascinating that we're still having these topics in 2025, tiptoeing from what we know to be the truth. So, guys, make sure you hit the like button coming into the chat. And we're going to get into the conversation specifically about this podcast, but not just that, but about guys like Scott Galloway and others not really dealing with the issues that affect. What's up, my brother? Salute to you, brother. D, welcome back, my brother. Make sure you guys hit the like button coming through the door. We're going to get this channel back on and popping. We'll have these conversations. Obviously, the world is going crazy with everything out here, the stock market, everything. Conversations, obviously. So we're going to get into these conversations in a second. Hold on, stand by for a second. And we're going to get this thing cooking. All right, there we go. Here we go. Okay. I want to talk about first. Let's go to this conversation. Interesting the conversation, interesting chat. I saw this video a little while back when I first came. I'm gonna get into that. It was an interesting conversation. I want to show you how bad things have gotten out of touch, right? From the norm. Where we go. I'll pull up on the screen. It's a very interesting conversation before we get into that. So, this is a conversation between Jordan Peterson. Let me see. Okay. So fair use. And I'm gonna have to stop this, but I want you to leave the link in the chat just in case. I don't know what the deal is with Megyn Kelly. Let me get my fair use banner going here. So again, here's a conversation going on between Jordan Peterson and Megyn Kelly. Fair use.
So Jordan, how does all of this affect women who need men?
Well, I think the most striking statistic that I know of is, well, the striking statistics are the two we already discussed. The radical rise in unhappiness among unmarried young women who have liberal proclivities, and the fact that 50% of women in the West now who are 30 don't have a child, and that half of those will never have a child despite wanting one.
Again, fair use. Let's continue on.
It's so dreadful. Like, you just take those women, let's just think about them for a minute. So that means that half of women at 30 who don't have a child, half of them will search for a mate and try to have a child, let's say through their 30s, and then that won't work. And so then they'll hit 40 and they'll be alone for 50 years. Right. And the thing is, as you get older, the people that you have gathered around you, your family, become increasingly important to you and increasingly necessary. And what you do when you mature is that you start attending to other people more than you attend to yourself. That's the definition of maturity. Now, you know that as a mother, and you also know that that's a relief, right? It's that you find your purpose in that. And
that's right.
When the lefties, they talk about marriage as a patriarchal, oppressive institution. And, you can be unlucky, and some women are. They find a man his mode of relation is power, and they end up subjugated, although they generally play their own part in that, because women aren't that easy to subjugate, all things considered.
No, they say you teach.
All right, here he is trying to lay the foundation. Fair use. Let's continue on. And again, he's talking about everything. I have to stop. I apologize that I have to stop because obviously I'm reacting to a video. But he tries to outline which is basically standard traditional values, which many women don't care, because you really can't talk to anyone nowadays because everybody only concerns himself about what they feel and how they feel, or what they feel about themselves. And everything you say, there's going to be a rebuttal, and it's always going to end up back into this idea of oppression and abuse. So if you try to talk logic, they only see it through the lenses of feminism and oppression and abuse. So it always goes back to that narrative, that oppressing, color purple narrative, abuse, toxicity, control, or anything else. So even Jordan himself has to walk on eggshells with this conversation. But it gets deeper now. But sorry, I have to stop every once in a while. Obviously, I'm doing a reaction to a video. Salute to Jordan and Megyn Kelly. But let's continue on.
People had to treat you.
Yes, well, like, women have their mechanisms and they're very effective. Let's put it that way. So, but you see that the problem with the progressive liberal types is that they think that being mentally healthy is a matter of getting your individual psyche in order. And that's not right. Being mentally healthy is a matter of arranging the hierarchy around you that you belong to in a harmonious manner, so that there's you and your relationship with yourself, but then there's you and your relationship with your husband, and then the relationship between both of you and your children, and then the relationship between your families and other families in your town, and then with with regard to your state and your nation, and then with regards to the natural world and to whatever's beyond that, say in the landscape of divinity. And happiness, resilience, meaning, purpose are all a consequence of organizing that hierarchy properly and finding your place within it. It's not an individualistic pursuit. And even the Scottish liberals, let's say, of the Enlightenment, who established liberal individuality, did that with the presumption that they were operating within a radically Christian framework and society. So what they did was they took the existence of that hierarchy for granted and then said, well, if you organize that properly, then you can be a fully functioning individual. It's like, fair enough. But when all that collapses and an increasing majority of young people are headed for a relationshipless and childless future, then none of those liberal presuppositions hold. And so that makes everyone, well, it deprives their life of the meaning that comes in social service.
All right, fair use, guys. We're gonna continue on.
And look, human beings are unbelievably social. You can take psychopathic murderers and you can punish them by depriving them of other people. That's how social we are. Right. So think about that.
That's a good point.
Yeah, right. So you can't be happy alone. Besides, you shouldn't be striving to be happy anyways, because happy is a side effect, not an aim. But even if it was an aim, which it isn't, there's no happiness alone. I mean, what? There's nothing happier than a friendless teenager. I mean, who believes that? No one breathing believes that. That's the stupidest thing you could believe. Like, teenagers are desperate to belong, and you can parody that and say, well, if your friends all jumped off a cliff, would you?
So far, I totally agree, but let's continue on.
And, there's limits to how much you should sacrifice your soul to be part of the group. But by the same token, like, what other people think of you and how they relate to you, not only does that matter, it should matter. And so the whole progressive theory of the human being it's flawed in a manner that makes its enactment produce nothing but resentful pathology and misery.
Let me ask you this. I've been dying to ask you this. I speak with a lot of young conservatives.
Okay, now here's where he gets into it, okay? And I have to stop. I apologize again. I have to stop because I have to react to a video. I don't want to get a copyright or whatever else. She's going to get into it, right? And what she's going to present is that there's a bunch of single, eligible women out here, educated, intelligent, and sharp, and whatever else. And her idea is that it still comes from the premise that the men are inadequate or inadequately prepared to date or be with these women, not even evaluating or considering whether or not these women are of any type of marriage or a wife quality themselves. What makes them so special? And these men or these young men, uniquely unqualified for these women themselves. Is the fundamental, is why is the test? Why is in 2025 the question about these young men or these men in general and their eligibility or qualifications without any test to the woman as to whether these women are wife quality or any of them are traditional in any sense of the imagination? So we have an environment where we have modern women with modern ideology, most of them indoctrinated feminist ideology, that are asking for men to be traditional in a sense. You have traditional, these women want men to be traditional, want men to step up to the plate and be better. but there's a violation of the social contract. And that is, what is better? What is these men getting that's better? But he's going to address this issue. And we're going to get into Scott Galloway, because again, we're getting into half truths with Scott Galloway in many instances. Because we look, indeed, we say the economy isn't what it is. Yeah. So we're going to get into these half truths. We're going to get into the dialogue, but we have to start with this, because he's the first person that really challenges this whole notion and this idea that the men themselves are inadequate and there's nothing wrong with the women. It's all the men. It's like 100% men's issues and men's problems, but the women are perfect. And it's just that the men are not producing or performing or doing anything. Even though we've had the last 50, 60 years of many policies put in place from the government, from corporations, from everything else, to uplift women while pushing down on men in the society. And that's never addressed. That systematically we have pushed men down to uplift women in a society. But even with that in mind, we've created this environment of female liberation. Look, it is what it is, but these topics are not clearly discussed. But let's continue on.
Conservative women regularly. And one of the let me ask you this. I've been dying to ask you this. I speak with a lot of young conservative women regularly. And and they are very aware of everything you've said. They've got their eye on the biological clock in a way the previous generation did not. They understand the risks of waiting too long to choose a partner, all of that. They do get it. But a lot of them still, they want a career of their own. They're driven professionally in that way. And what they ask me, Jordan, is, should I just settle? Should I just settle? I'm 29 now. I have a career that I like. I haven't met.
The word, again, I have to stop. The word settle. Settle. What are they settling for? And who are they? And isn't the man himself settling? What is this man getting special that other men have experienced before? If this man getting a kept woman or a virgin or a woman that's agreeable and not combative, a woman that has traditional values, that's cooperative and willing to be either under a man's leadership or in a fair and equitable partnership with a man, what is this man settling with? Is he the first? Or is he the guy number 30th? What is this man getting special? Is the question. And that's the fundamental question we got to ask. Settle for what? Settle for who? Who are these guys settling for? Some liberated woman that has enjoyed sexual liberation? And that's what fascinates me. What is these young men getting, or men in general, that they should be so excited about or so in a hurry to level themselves up for? Now, that's why I don't even use women. I tell men to level yourself up for your own financial freedom and practice self-development and focus on building yourself into the man you need to be. So if you decide one day that having a family or whatever you want to have, that's your prerogative. If you decide you don't want to, that's up to you too. But it's never centered around being better for today's women, because at the end of the day, that men are not getting the same deal as their grandfathers. And I think the quicker men realize that, the easier it would be. But she brings up this word settle, which is a fundamentally in itself, when you examine it deeply, we'll take a deep dive into that later, but let's get into, and once you see the expression on Jordan Peterson's face when she talks about the word settle, as if these men are winning some type of prize that has not been enjoyed before. Let's continue on.
The right guy yet, but there are guys who are interested in me. So should I just settle now for
Well, the
somebody
first
who I'm
thing I
really
would-
not that into?
Well, the first thing I would ask is that who's settling in that
Exactly.
equation? Like, it's quite the narcissistic proclamation that it's clearly you who's settling, and that might even be more true if you're 29, because you're competing with a lot of 24-year-olds by that point, and they put a lot less biological pressure on a potential mate. Like, look, when I was out touring 3 nights in a row, the same question came up, because I do a Q&A at the end of my lectures, and this is in the last round of tours. And one of the questions was, well, how do I find the person that's right for me? And I didn't answer it the first night. There was something about the question I didn't like. And then it came up 2 more nights in a row and was voted up by the audience. And the third night I thought, oh, I know why I tried stumbling through an answer and it didn't work. And then the third night I thought, oh, I know what the problem is here. That's the wrong question.
Exactly.
Because the right question is, how do I make myself into the sort of person that's so attractive to other people that potential mates are lining up for me? That's a way different question than how do I find the person that's right for me? Like, first of all, who are you?
I like that.
And what's so special about you that how do you know that the right person wouldn't take one look at you and run away screaming if they had any sense? Like, seriously, you're settling, are you? If you use that language, even the first thing you might ask yourself is, why do you start with such a high opinion of yourself and such a low opinion of the people who are pursuing you? Now, look, I understand that it's necessary to be attracted to a potential partner, and that women have the right and the duty to be picky. They should find a man who's going to be not a child and who's going to be very helpful to them in all ways, particularly when they have children, and who's going to be a good father. And so hooray to women for being picky. But that's not the same thing as starting out narcissistic. We talked about Snow White. Before she could find a prince, she had to learn to be of service to the dwarves. Like, that's worth thinking about. Now, you might think, well, why should we pay attention to a fairy tale? It's like, well, how about because people remembered it for 15,000 years and that Disney just spent $250 million trying to retell it and failed. And then with regards to the order of affairs in a woman's life, look, I calculated recently that even an attractive woman, like radically attractive woman, let's say, who often has her own problems, by the way, because she tends to scare men away, right? A lucky woman has 5 potential partners in her life. 5. You get 5 chances. That's it. Now think about let's just think that through, right? Because it's a terrifying way to think. So imagine that you're primarily looking, say, from the time you're 16 at the lowest end to say 30. Like, because after that, it's starting to get harder because the clock is ticking so desperately. 1 in 3 couples at 30 already have fertility problems, by the way, which is defined as
fair use, guys. I mean, he breaks it down, but let's continue on.
difficulty conceiving within a year, even though the attempts are being made. Okay, so let's say you got 14 years, something like that. Now, how long does it take to find someone and then figure out who they are, especially if they're strangers? Before you're going to decide to marry someone, likely you're going to want to know them for a year, something like that.
Yep.
And so that's 5 years right there with 5 people. But that also assumes that you go from one relationship to another with no intervening space, so you're not suffering too much. For example, when a potentially promising relationship collapses, or you don't get sick, or something doesn't waylay you in your professional career. So imagine 2 years per relationship. That's 10 years for 5. That's assuming that people want to be around you. So I don't know if you're settling. I get the picture. You don't want to lie to someone and tell them that you find them attractive in all possible ways when you don't, but maybe you could start the bloody process with a little more humility.
Well, I
and
like the
maybe
way you started that. What shouldn't the goal be to make yourself so attractive just in heart and soul, not to mention on the outside, that does require some effort, that they're lining up, there. And if that's not happening, why? Why is it? Tariff wars, stubborn.
So basically, and that's the fundamental problem that we see right now. The question is this: what is it that what's so special about you that the men are settling for? Hey, good morning, Gail. Salute to Gail. How you doing, my sister? Good to see you, man. It's been a while. Obviously, I've been doing the snowbird thing. Salute to you. So, and Jordan broke it down quickly, man. What are you settling for? Everybody has this delusional sense of self. And especially nowadays with social media, and obviously we have a gynocentric that we live in. What is this settling thing that people are talking about? What's so specially about you that the men are settling? It's the fundamental question. What's going on, Dan? Salute to you, my brother. My brother from Bangkok. Of course, I'm back in the West. You know what I mean? Hey, guys, make sure you guys hit the like button. But this is a funny question. And the reason why I'm having this conversation, and I'm glad Jordan Peterson said what he said. The wrong question is being asked. What's so special about these individuals, and what package deal that these men are getting that's going to, better their life or add value to their life in any type of way? And even her, at least she's open-minded to have this conversation. But I really want to open with this because I wanted to take it back to this podcast and the goofiness of this podcast, because I watched it a little bit, and I found it interesting. Let me get the fair use banner down. When I looked at this podcast, look at it. Look at how it starts out. Right? Are dating apps creating a generation of incels? Incels. There are quite a few incels. There's no denying that. But is it just dating apps? Or is it just systematic that these things were created? I mean, they've been trying for the last 70 years to feminize men or change or redefine families, attacking masculinity, wearing men down. And many of these men today, well, don't even want to talk about the Black community. They're pretty much raised in a matriarchal culture to be subservient to women. And we've had this system in place to corporations, to the government, where we've created this environment where it's almost toxic to even be considered. Like they have terms like toxic masculinity, made up terms like that. And I guess the Mental Health Association, consider it as a mental disorder. Like this is like these attacks on masculinity and manhood, or anything that makes you a man. So we have these half truths that's being pushed around by, of course, a guy like Scott Galloway, who still wants the approval, of the society so that he can still continue making money. And everything he talks about in terms of manhood and masculinity is about defined through servitude to women. Servitude to women. It's not like men and masculinity is being approved by guys going out there on the gauntlet and battling for who's the better fighter or soldier or whatever else. It's all about servitude to women. And that's the fundamental flaw of the whole argument with Scott Galloway. So when I watch these podcasts, and when I'm going to go to it, and we talk about these dating apps, and I see videos like this, okay? So we go into this, right? This is what really fun. Diary of a CEO. Salute to the brother, okay? And you have these disingenuous conversation, right? And again, when I see stuff like this, everything about masculinity, and obviously you look at this woman right here, you can tell she's got that feminist vibe just emanating from her, right? You look at this woman, right? Remember, masculinity to them is all about what served society. And even Scott Galloway, in his way, he wants batteries. He wants men to be plugged back in. He wants these men plugged back in so they could be a better servitude to women, and his greater idealism of a world that no longer exists because the women have changed and society has changed. And I don't think it's going back. It's going to be the way it's going to be. And you're asking men to be traditional minded in many ways for a society that's no longer plays by the same set of rules anymore. And you have women like this, and we're trying to say incels and whatever else, even though there are some men that need some help in terms of their own developing their own manhood and masculinity, but not as it applies to servitude to women, developing men to be better for men. And that's even with my channel. I talk about men. That's why I don't show women on this channel, because the focus needs to be on men being better for men, not men being better to be disposable tampon, to be, some ploy in making women's lives better, or some tool or some sacrificial animal that to be used and discarded. It's about making men better for men without it being in servitude to women. If women indirectly or directly benefits from the men becoming better, wonderful. But men need to focus today more than ever before in being better for men without any consideration. You go to the gym because you want to live longer and stay in health. You go work and you invest your money. You do smart things with your money. So you want to be able to be free financially and to experience the benefits of early retirement. And if you want to have a family, you're able to better provide for them. But it has to do with men being better for men, as opposed to a guy like Scott Galloway, who only sees men as these disposable tampons for society. And everything is centered around them being better for women. And what about a man's life? So he talks about these. It's like he's trying to say, get off the sideline and to serve women, not get off the sideline because that's what's good for you. And we're going to create things that are better for you in terms of policy, because the policy that and what is the issue now is, and even when you look at certain party, they focus on gender issues, identity politics, and so on and so forth. He said this top. Jimmy Fun. He said the top 10% of men benefit from continued supply of 3 or 4s. Smart ones do not settle. The other lines are men better be wise and not commit to a used up. Well, obviously we know what the situation is that we know what happens when women get to a certain age, and even to an extent that this is not their first choice and this is not their preference. And social media has made it that way, where, dudes who's getting those consolation prize like Moise Watkins or any of these guys who believe that there's some type of whatever, where the women are like, hey, look, I got to pick somebody that can, put some babies in me and pay some bills and whatever else. But this is not my choice. To be honest with you, this is something that I got to, quote unquote, settle for, even though the woman is not really settling, because at that point in time, she's not in her 20s anymore, or she's not, exactly the most fertile in terms of all of her eggs. So really the guy is getting a raw deal because this woman is going to bring certain feminist indoctrination, liberal ideology into that house with that man. And everything becomes a measuring stick where, who washes the dishes, who takes out the trash, who does all these things. Everything that she does for that man becomes now she's measuring it. And her ideology and her mindset is that if she does anything to serve this man, this is a form of oppression. But that man is still expected to be traditional. He expected to pay all the bills. He's expected to take care of all the hard tasks and things around the house. He's expected to be egalitarian in terms of watching the kids, taking care of everything else. So we're dealing with an imbalanced environment itself. But most of these podcasts are designed to shame the men into becoming better for today's modern women, not to become better for themselves as men and whatever else. So let's continue on. I want you to listen to how this podcast starts out, and salute to the brother who does this podcast. Very good podcast, but we're dealing in half truths nowadays. So let's continue on.
This is a critical conversation around truly the future of humanity.
But we don't like to talk about this.
This report is absolutely shocking. This is a crisis and young men are struggling. So I sat down with two leading voices on societal issues to discuss the rise of millions of lonely, addicted men. And the most important question is, how do we fix this? So let's start with this.
Listen to how the podcast starts. Listen to it. It's ridiculous.
Graph. It shows that young women are now out earning young men.
It is true. We have given women so many tools to achieve, but now boys are being left behind.
And that the number of males aged 16 to 24 who are not in education or employment has increased by a staggering 40%.
Yeah.
And the data I've seen is that when the woman in the relationship starts making more money, they become twice as likely to get divorced.
Because traditionally women seek partners who have more economic or social status than they do. And emotional intelligence is the new currency in dating. But these guys were raised not to be emotionally intelligent, but to be a provider.
That a lack of male involvement in kids' lives is a big factor leading to this. And once they lose a male role model, they become much more likely to engage in criminal activity.
And so we are just creating a lot of these angry young single men who are saying, well, this is rigged against me.
We actually asked some of our audience to write in, and this guy, Jeffrey, wrote in and said, my entire life, I've never felt like I was good enough. Like I could never earn my place in society.
It's devastating. But something that's controversial I've gotten pushback on. I think the secret weapon for men that they don't leverage is to...
I want to hear a woman's perspective on it.
Honestly, what I would do is...
This has always blown my mind a little bit. 53% of you that listen to this show regularly haven't yet subscribed to this show. So could I ask you for a favor before we start? If you like the show and you like what we do here and you want to support us, the free, simple way that you can do just that is by hitting the subscribe button. And my commitment to you is if you do that, then I'll do everything in my power, me and my team, to make sure that this show is better for you every single week. We'll listen to your feedback, we'll find the guests that you want me to speak to, and we'll continue to do what we do. Thank you so much. Lost.
Okay, fair use. Now, we obviously see they start off with this catastrophic statistics, and it's a crisis out here. These guys are sitting in the basement, doing whatever they're doing to themselves, and they're just not being better for the greater society. These porn addicted, these corn addicted losers, that's the problem right now. Okay, so we're going to address the symptom. We're not going to address the virus itself. We're not going to address the virus. We're going to address the symptom of the virus, not the fact that we've created this reality. Or created a certain reality in society, but they're not going to address that. So now we're going to focus on, we're going to focus on why these men are not better, not for their own benefit, but for the benefit of women. not for their own benefit, and how we can make them better for themselves. And not that we've beaten down on these men for the last 70 years. You know, we're not going to focus on cause and effect or causation. We're not going to focus on what created the problem, or if there is a real problem, or maybe the offerings that they're offering right now are just not even valuable themselves to the men themselves. I mean, what is being offered for these young men? What is the incentive? Because men respond to incentives like anybody else. What is being offered? A life of suffering with some ball-busting, ultra-liberal feminist to become Homer Simpson? Then after 20 years, to be divorced, raped in court, lose majority of your asset, lose your kids, be shamed, or some guy gets into a relationship and he's some sexless marriage where he gets laughed at by the greatest society. What is the incentive? It's what's missing from this whole equation, because the greatest divorce now going on is the great divorce. And we're not really dealing with the issues with society itself. Why is this a good deal for men? Why is participating in certain aspects of society even a good deal for today's men? This is the elephant in the room. You know? He says men do better, same stuff, be better for women who have careers but won't provide for a man and children. Well, that's a fact. You know, and again, their money is their money and your money is our money. So even with all this the same women are talking about they want provider men. They want men making more. So now you get in when you have an ultra liberal woman that is a devout feminist, and you still have to pay 100% of the bills, or she wants you to pay the majority of the bills, take on the majority of the expenses, because her money is her money and your money is your money. I don't understand what the benefits are. You're not getting any traditional benefits. So the social contract itself has gone into the trash can. There is no social contract. There's whatever that woman decides, and whatever the court of public opinions decide, because anything that happens in that relationship is automatically the man's fault. So it's really the question becomes, what is the deal that's being offered to men today? So let's continue on. Again, fair use.
Boys. In March 2025, the Centre of Social Justice released this report, which has sent a couple of shockwaves across the UK, especially across the media. And just to give you a little bit of a sort of preface and some context on what this report says, at the start of the report, Andy Cook, who's the CEO of the report, says, "We listen to those working on the front line, the teachers, the youth workers, the charities, and the parents who day in, day out see the struggles of young people. And in recent years, they've been telling us the same thing. Something is going on with our boys." And because of this, they wrote this report called The Lost Boys, which looks at all of the different facets of why young men are struggling. And in this report, they say boys are struggling in education. They're more likely to take their own lives. They're finding it more difficult to find stable work. And far too often they're caught in crime. The numbers don't lie. Something has shifted and we cannot ignore it any longer. It's not just about Andrew Tate or online influencers. These are symptoms, not the cause. The deeper truth is that too many boys are growing up without the guidance, discipline, and purpose they need to survive. And there's some frankly horrific graphs, which actually sent the CEO of my company, a lady called Georgie, into quite an emotional state. She texted me and told me she was crying looking at some of these graphs, which we'll talk about today. But this is a subject that I know both of you know very, very well. So I'm keen to get into exactly why this is happening and what we can do about it. But to preface this discussion, to understand where you both come from and the perspective you have, Logan, who are you?
Yeah.
And what do you do?
I'm a behavioral scientist turned dating coach. So that means that I take all the lessons from the field of behavioral science, how we make decisions, and then I apply them to the field of relationship science, which is how love works. And so I'm really passionate about this topic because for a long time, I've
Fair use. Let's continue.
found that wherever I go, people say, "Oh, I know all these great single women. Do you know any great single guys?" And I just thought, "Oh, okay, maybe that's always been happening." But when I actually dug into the data, I saw that we are truly in a dating crisis right now. And there is a huge mating gap between the type of men that women are looking for and the type of men that are available. This is a critical conversation around truly the future of humanity.
That's again. Here we go again. And that's why I played that video with Jordan Peterson. Okay, the type of men women are looking for, and the type of men that are available. Obviously, hypergamy is a reality of life, where there's never any discussion about the type of women men are looking for and the type of women that are available. And that's where she misses the boat, because her perspective is still based on a feminist foundation that the men are lacking. And she based all of this on what? Education and income. What she's not looking at is, are any of these women, even with their education and their income, anything that men would want to be married to? What type of character do they have? Are they agreeable women? Do they bring any type of values that are traditional to the table? Do the men want these women? It's kind of like that. It's an arrogant, narcissistic premise to begin with, assuming that the only issue we have is with the men. There is issue with the men, young men, but there's also issue with young women. One of them is now with the social media situation, is high level of promiscuity that women are able to take part in because of the global sexual marketplace. There's a high level of disagreeableness, and there's a high level of lacking of skills that would make them able to take care of kids, household, help manage a household with kids. They don't have the same skills that their grandmothers and mothers had. So even though these women are educated and whatever, what if that woman has 40 bodies? She's been with 30 partners because she took in part in sexual liberation. So this guy is supposed to be excited about getting a woman that slept with 50 guys? The elephant in the room. And we get back to the young man. So you want your young man who you've worked hard and raised, educated, took care of, and let's say a woman is making 100,000, he's making 90,000, 80,000. But this woman has, this is guy number 35. The young man you raise is guy number 35. What is that guy getting is the question we have to consider. So there's an imbalance in many aspects of life, in many aspects of relationships, because like I said, the global sexual marketplace changed things. Women's empowerment changed things, and so many things are different nowadays. So I think young men in general, and young men specifically, are looking at the divorce laws, looking at what has happened to their uncles, what's happened to many men in their family, and they're saying, well, is this a good deal that society is presenting for me? And I think a lot of young men have checked out. Yeah, so let's continue on.
Because marriage rates are down, that means birth rates are down. And so this conversation.
I got to say salute to my brother Gregory Scotland. First super chat since I've been back. Salute a peaceful life. I know that you have noticed since the election that there is this disconnection of red pill and the lack of college degree. Facts, my brother. Salute to you. You guys, if you want to support the channel, please do. Appreciate you. Absolutely. Absolutely. College degree. And before I get into this feminist right now, I'm glad you brought that up, Gregory, because I want to check. They associate these college degrees with actual status. And most of these college degrees, and I tell you, they come at me, I have 2 college degrees. So if you want to attack me about college degrees, good luck. I already have college degrees. And I'm telling you right now, most of these people have college degrees in social scientists of psychology and other liberal arts majors that don't make any money. They're working at they're working at these jobs where they're office cubicles. They're only making $30-something thousand a year, $40,000 a year. So they having college degrees don't necessarily translates into higher income. And even for many of these women that have higher income, most of that money is spent anyhow. They're living check to check. Because I saw the video about, they just spend more money. Habits, spending habits and whatever else. So this idea of college degrees and status, when most of these degrees are in jobs and fields that don't pay much money. We're using education as opposed to real skill and talent to actually, create this status thing. When reality is most of these women are not making any money. What they make, they spend too. Many skilled tradesmen out here are making some really seriously good money. And again, we're going back to how men are lacking. But she has this idea that these because, college degree in what? What is your field of study? You're the communication degree? And do you want to find somebody that has a degree too? What, he's going to have a degree in communication too? It's crazy. Think about it, man. Exactly. Gregory said, I have to manage my money. You got to manage your money. No, I was doing the snowbird. I was doing the snowbird thing, man, but I'm back, man. But it's like, they have all these ideas of what makes them better based upon most of these degrees is just scams from these colleges anyhow. Get you to get in debt. And they don't talk about debt. How much debt did these women have? If you look at how much credit card debt and how much student loan and how much money these women pay, it really, when you look at income itself, salute to you, my brother, coming in again strong, man. Appreciate it. Long time, my brother. Salute to you, man. I'm just coming back from the east, back to the west. Salute to you. I appreciate your super chat, man. Appreciate you supporting the channel, man, Erica. If you look at the amount of debt and debt payments every month, and then you examine the income of these people, then you examine the cost for which they live. Like me, I'm bald-headed. Like my brother Eric, I'm bald. I cut this shit in 5 minutes in the bathroom with my head shaver, right? I don't even go to a barber. That saves me money. I own my car. I live in this house that I've owned for many years. So when you look at the expense of a man, I'm a bachelor, other than my kid that lives in a basement, and I see that dude maybe 4 weeks out of the year because he's an athlete in college. He's always on campus. He's gone. So when you do the mathematics, it costs me a fraction of what it costs a woman to live. I don't have to go to hair salon. I don't get no nails done. I don't have expensive clothes. This shirt that I'm wearing is probably the equivalent of $10. Because I certainly don't peacock for any women. Do I have nice things in there to wear? Yeah. But this is my typical shirt I walk around in. I'm going to the gym or whatever else. I only get dressed up when I got to go somewhere. So my cost basis to survive is extremely low. A woman has to expend a tremendous amount of money, from the money on makeup, from the money on hair, from the money on clothes, from the money of dining out, because many of them can't cook no more like their mothers. So we're not really doing a complete analysis of the situation, because we got to look at how much it costs to live, how much it costs for these people to live. But again, this is one of those women. She's giving half truths as well as Scott Galloway. But it's all centered around how men are failing or how men are not stepping up to the plate. So that assumes automatic by default that the women are perfect. And it's the men that's the problem. But let's continue on. Hey, yes, guys, please hit the like button. Let's move the stream. Appreciate you, Eric. Appreciate you, Gregory, for supporting the channel. Guys, please support the channel if you want. We want to keep this content coming that's based purely on an objective opinion. I'm not trying to sell my soul for anything. To be honest with you, I want to keep bringing it raw, and because this is crazy how we still having these conversations in 2025 and not really addressing the elephant in the room, because everybody's afraid to be called a misogynist. Everybody's afraid to be called a woman hater. Everybody's afraid to be shamed or say because you can't say anything to people today. You can't say anything. I only talk about this stuff to you guys online. You can't tell women nothing. Look at Felicia Rashad. She did the same thing Monique did. Tried to talk to these women. And look what happened to her. They told her, shut your old mouth up. That's basically what they're saying. Shut up, old lady. We don't want to hear you tell us anything about who you should wear. You're old-fashioned. What they call Felicia Rashad? Pick me and a kept woman. Monique, they jumped in her ass when she told them about to chill out with the pajamas in the airport and shit. You can't correct it. They don't want to be told what to do. That's traditional or whatever, because it sounds to them like patriarchy. Now, if you're telling women to dress like 304s, if you're telling them to be promiscuous and date multiple guys, if Alicia Rashad was telling women to be promiscuous and date multiple guys, you know what they would do? You know? And that's really what it comes down to. Let's continue on with this. Hopefully I can stand a few minutes of this stuff because, again, we get back into this conversation again. Let's continue on.
And is extremely important.
And what sort of reference points do you draw upon? Because you've got some sort of unique access to data, right?
Right. So I work at Hinge for the last 5 years. And so I have access to tons of data there around how daters are dating now, how daters are dating differently, what sets successful daters apart. And then I also have conducted my own research for this conversation. So I sent out a survey to thousands of my newsletter subscribers, and people were very excited to talk about this. And I've conducted a lot of new research that I'll be sharing for the first time on this topic.
So I make my living looking at data and trying to come up with insights. I spend most of my career looking at data to try and add shareholder value. And then I have the luxury now of focusing on things I'm really interested in. And I just stumbled upon data that reflects that the cohort that is ascended fastest globally is women. And this is a wonderful thing and a huge collective victory. And the group that has fallen furthest fastest is men in Western markets. And the data was just so overwhelming. And also, I was close to being one of these men. I didn't have a lot of economic or romantic prospects when I was a young man, but there were programs and an environment where I could be successful. And I worry that some of the temptations of technology, the economic trends, had they been where they are now then, I could have very easily ended up a statistic. So I just sort of relate to these problems.
I'm keen to understand from your perspectives what you think like the first domino that falls in a young man's life or a young boy's life that causes the outcomes we're talking about today. Like where is the first place to start?
So the research I've looked at, and Richard Reeves from the American Institute of Boys and Medicine, good research here, the point of failure, if you reverse engineered issues to, is when a boy loses a male role model. And that is, in the US, we have the second most single family parent homes behind Sweden. And what's interesting is that in single parent homes, girls actually have similar outcomes, similar rates of high school attendance, income.
He's on the right track, but let's continue on.
Rates of self-harm. Boys, once they lose a male role model, become much more likely to be incarcerated, engage in criminal activity, harm themselves. It ends up that while being physically stronger, boys are emotionally and mentally much weaker. So the loss of a male role model is, I would argue, kind of the first point of failure that predicts that a boy is going to struggle. And that has impacts on family court, economic policy, and just general zeitgeist in our society, where men need to step up. If we want better men, we need to be better men. We need to step into that void.
Another one that Richard Reeves talks about is that there's not enough men in the education system.
100%.
So I believe when Tim Waltz was a teacher, 1 out of 3 teachers in his school was a man, but now it's like 24%.
Yeah.
And so where do kids spend most of their time? In school. And who's teaching them? Mostly not men.
And you think, well, women can be fantastic teachers, and it's
Right.
true, but after school programs, not as many coaches that typically are male, not as much compensation, so they don't get rewarded for being coaches. And if you just think about it logically, who does a teacher champion? A teacher champions someone that reminds them of themselves when they were a kid. So, and also just look at there's incredible bias, I would argue, against males in school. A boy is twice as likely to be suspended on a behavior adjusted basis, twice as likely to be suspended for the exact same infraction as a girl, 5 times as likely if it's a black boy. And once you're suspended twice, it probably means you're not going to college. In addition, look at the behaviors we promote in school. Sit still, be a pleaser, be organized, raise your hand. You basically just described a girl. And also, quite frankly, a lot of the jobs that require tertiary education attainment, there's more women now in law school and medical school. And quite frankly, good for them. They're just better at that. They're better students. They deserve to make more money. They deserve it. But the reality is, it has huge ramifications when we no longer have wood, auto, or metal shop. They've gone away.
Right.
So those used to be a path to do some middle-class jobs. They've been replaced by computer science. And so what are the paths for the 2/3 of males that aren't going to end up with a traditional liberal arts college degree?
Right. And just to add a few more stats to that. So we know that 70% of valedictorians in the US are female, and women are much more likely to be in the top 10% of their class. But then on the SAT, men and women, or young men and women, earn the same scores. So there's definitely something happening in schools that is prioritizing the female experience, or that women are better at that. We definitely want to celebrate this.
Once again, we're going off the rails. And salute to my brother Gregory Scotland. He say, how come men in the manosphere can offer answers to questions we look at logically and others look at it emotionally? That's a fact. Because at the end of the day, my brother, the reason why is that we're not trying to appease to a gynocentric environment. And that's really what it comes down to, because again, even a guy like Scott Galloway, he has to really straddle a line, whereas he can only give half truths. And he can give the truth, but he has to water it down in a way not to offend this gynocracy or women in general, because he still depends on women. So he has to start off kind of shaming the outcome as opposed to deal with the causation in a truthful and honest manner. Guys in the manosphere don't care. They just put it out there. Here's what happened. Here's how we got to this point. And again, we're looking at standardized testing, and we're talking about all of these programs and all of these things designed to empower women and empower girls. And there's nothing wrong with empowering people, but not at the expense of others. If you empower somebody, if you empower boys and girls at the same level, that's one thing. But if you're empowering girls and pushing down on boys, or you're empowering women and men this equally, but if you're empowering women and pushing down on men, then it creates a problem, because you're empowering women at the expense of men. You're taking away from men to give to women, as opposed to equally empowering both genders. And, and that's the fundamental flaw in the whole conversation. So we're seeing these outcomes because we have created an imbalance where we have pushed all the programs over towards girls. And of course, LGBTQ and all kinds of things that are being pushed into the school system and the educational system at the expense of heterosexual or heteronormative boys. And we have a situation where we have many teachers themselves that have gone to these colleges and been indoctrinated with many of these liberal ideologies, and they have a certain idea or mindset towards manhood, masculinity, and boys in general. And the idea is to really not create an educational environment that's conducive to boys. It's like a push down. Oh, absolutely, my brother. He said, if you were on that panel, you would point out the choices that women make in their house. Yes, absolutely. Salute to you again, man. Appreciate your support. But again, they're not going to address that systematically we've been attacking manhood and masculinity for a long time in this country. We've been promoting policies, especially in the Black community. You look at the Great Society since 65, and you look at the policies that are in place that incentivize so many things, incentivize single motherhood, incentivize not having a man in the house. Then you attack this idea of manhood and masculinity. We have toxic masculinity being considered a mental issue and a mental disorder when it's a made-up term. Because with masculinity, it has to do emotional intelligence is some female stuff. It really is emotional discipline for men. The thing for men is discipline. Discipline comes from fathers. Fathers teach our boys how to be disciplined. So they've created this. Emotional intelligence is really for women because they're emotional. And it's not for men. For men, it's emotional discipline, not emotional intelligence. We have to teach men discipline. Because without discipline, you're doomed. And I made videos in the past talk about discipline is more important than game. Because if you can't discipline yourself, you're going to have a hard life as a man. But they brought this feminine nonsense of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is about everything that benefits women. It's really designed for more so a simple economy and the benefit of women. It really has no bearing on anything. It's just a society that we've created that caters to women. So you're basically asking men to be more feminine or considerate towards women, at the expense of men. And again, the idea that masculinity could ever be toxic, it's these made up terms that they've created really because of the way they want to redefine society, redefine systems, and create softer men that are easy to control and manipulate, and that's really what it comes down to. Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that was done. I mean, obviously, when you give women a taste of power, they're not going to give that up. I mean, they've had power over that community. It's a matriarchal culture right now. And even the simps themselves in that community will attack you. These feminine men or these mama's boy simps, man, they will destroy you. Because in that community, it's a matriarchal culture, and mother and women are God. And that's been systematically created. Obviously, you keep people a certain way. You create, obviously, the plantation, you keep them voting a certain way, and they vote about because in that community, they only vote about women's empowerment come first, girls, LGBTQ, women's empowerment. That's what they vote. Anything that has to do with men or men and boys, Black men and boys, is completely frowned upon in that community. Because in their community, that idea that it's a matriarchal culture, a matriarchal society created through government policy, and it's designed for women to be in control and power so they can control the men. It controls the vote. And that's the disturbing thing about that community. You can't fix that. That's not what we're going to fix. Because once those women get power, they're not giving that power up. I mean, you can forget it. Because that's why you can't even talk to them. They got a rebuttal for everything you say. Anything you say, you're going to be labeled as a hater of women, toxic masculinity. They're going to come at you and try. That's why Scott Galloway is over here walking on her eggshells, telling half truths. Because he's afraid that they're going to call him a misogynist. If he knows the truth. So he's trying to water it down as much as he possibly can so it's digestible to the palates of society in today's modern women. And that's what he's forced to do. Because once again, once you get labeled a misogynist, what happens inevitably It's people, they'll do that to get people to stop listening to you. Oh, this guy just hates women. Not that he's a teller of truth or anything that supports men or actually tries to fix the problems legitimately with men becoming better for men. Men becoming better for men, not to be used as a disposable tampon. When we have that conversation, now that doesn't benefit the greatest society or Scott's Galloway's plan or anybody's plan to use men as disposable tampon. Now there's a problem with that. But anyhow, let's continue on. There we go.
Success of women. I think the changes that have happened over the last 50 years are incredible. And I feel like I'm a beneficiary of that. And so is my daughter. If you look at all of the books that my daughter was given when she was born, they're about great women in history. You can be anything. Dream big, little one. And so I feel like we have given women so many tools to achieve. And in many ways, those have been manifested. But now boys are being left behind. And so this isn't a zero-sum game. I was nervous about coming on here because I thought people would say, she's a male apologist. She doesn't see how much women are still struggling. I think everyone is struggling. I think life is hard.
Yeah.
But what's happening right now is we need to have empathy for young men and we need to bring them up because this isn't just a problem about young men. And patriarchy doesn't just hurt women. A lot of people think about the patriarchy as something that prizes men and hurts women. But when there's a very narrow definition of men, everyone is hurt by that. And that's all the research that I've done is over and over seeing women feel like they are not enough good men to date, and men feel like they're being held to a ridiculous standard of holding both sides of the coin, being feminine and masculine.
It turns out, as you were speaking, I was looking at the stats around fatherless homes, and it turns out that there has been a significant increase in the amount of young boys being raised without a father present. About 25% live without a biological step or adoptive father, according to the National Fatherhood Initiative. In the US has the world's highest rate of children living in a single parent household, and 92% of the time that's with the mother alone. And in 1968, only 11% of children lived with only their mother, compared to 21% in 2020. So that's doubled in the last 50 odd years, which is pretty staggering. And then obviously the consequence of that, as Scott described, is that individuals from father absent homes were 300% more likely to carry drugs, to carry guns, to deal drugs, and there's this huge plethora of mental health consequences if you don't have a father in the home. I mean, what do we do about that? And like, where are the fathers?
Yeah.
Where are the role? Where are they going?
Well, it's complicated. There's male abandonment. There's just no getting around it. But also going back to family courts, sometimes the courts in the our economy make it difficult for a man to stay involved in the kids' lives. And also, family courts getting better at saying, all right, the kids, I mean, just a personal anecdote. I have a friend who recently has gone through divorce, 2 daughters, very much wants to be involved in their lives. They're 13 and 15-year-old girls. And quite frankly, dad's there on the weekends and they got their own thing going on. And they don't necessarily make dad a priority. And dad's not around for what I call the garbage time. And that is what I found with my boys is the moments of serendipity and connection happen randomly when you're taking them to school, when you're out in the back, jumping around or playing whatever it is, these garbage moments. And when you're not in the household, for whatever reason, there isn't that much garbage time. And I think slowly but surely they lose sometimes connection with their kid. There's something weird going on. I'm curious, Logan, if you've got data on this, but you have a 1-year-old daughter, right? You're going to be amazed when my 14-year-old boy had a Halloween party. And the boys are like cute, but they're dopes. They're boys. There's some 14-year-old girls who look like they could be the junior senator from Pennsylvania. They're 5'10". They're articulate. Yeah. Hello, Mr. Galloway. How are you? What a lovely home. And the boys are like, I don't know. And biologically, girls mature faster. Their prefrontal cortex is 18 months ahead of a boy's. An 18-year-old girl or woman is competing against a 16-and-a-half-year-old when she's competing against an 18-year-old. And they're even finding that it's getting worse, that women or girls are starting to menstruate.
Fair use. Let's continue on.
rate earlier, and boys' testicles are descending later. So the gap in maturity, biological gap, they think might even be growing, and they don't know if it's pesticides. But when I meet my 8th graders colleagues, there's a huge difference
Colleagues.
between the boys and the girls.
Yeah.
And one of Richard's suggestions is that we redshirt boys, that we hold them a year back. The boys start kindergarten at 6, whereas girls start at 5.
So the research in the UK shows that 70% of girls are ready to start school at age 5, but many fewer boys are capable of starting at that age in terms of readiness. And so if you were to hold boys back, then they might be on more equal playing field for those critical moments of 4 to 5, of 13 to 14, where the brains really develop at a different stage.
I want to talk about that sort of early education experience and how it can be adapted, but also just like if the environment of the classroom is right for boys. As we were talking about the point about fathers and listeners as well, I found this graph, which is also pretty shocking. And it goes into something you said, Scott. It basically shows that the absence of father on a boy causes depressive symptoms, but the absence of a father on a young girl doesn't cause the same depressive symptoms, which means that the absence of a father for a boy drastically increases their chance of being depressed, whereas if for a girl it doesn't.
There's a lot of other graphs that look like that in terms of women and young girls are just actually a lot more resilient in childhood. So if you are in foster care as a young woman, you have less negative outcomes than young men. And so there's this theory in parenting of, is your child an orchid or a dandelion? And so the orchid really needs very particular situations to grow. They need a certain amount of light. They need to be watered in a particular way, and they'll thrive in some situations and they will not thrive in others. Whereas a dandelion can really survive in many situations. And so women, young girls tend to be more dandelions in childhood. And so that's why when you have a boy and a girl, both in negative situations, the boy is more negatively impacted.
Boys are just weaker. There's a crazy stat I read that 2 15-year-olds, a boy and a girl, both sexually molested. And to be clear, they're equally heinous crimes. But the boy who's sexually molested is 6 to 10 times more likely to kill himself later in life. It ends up that boys are just less resilient.
Do you think there's somehow
ridiculous? See, this is the fundamental problem right there. Amazing. They have nothing. This is the funny, crazy part about it. It's not even getting into the psychology of men and the system designed in these schools where the majority of teachers are female, many of them feminists in many instances that have certain issues about masculinity and manhood in the first place. So if you go into a school setting, and what is the percentage of teachers that are female in America? Yeah, you look it up. So you look at it. So even from, this is 2021 stat, and we're being generous here. 2021 stat have almost 77% of teachers that are female. You push it today, it's probably into the 80 percentile for 2025. So, and most of these women are educated in these liberal indoctrinated institutions. Many of them are hardcore feminists. So in essence, and not only that, you have to understand the psychology of men, where outwardly expressing any type of emotion of pain or suffering is immediately shamed, or you be called weak, soft, whatever. And this is where fathers come into the equation. What she's not calculating is there's a tremendous social and institutional support system for girls in a gynocentric environment, which is the West. Would it be societal? Would it be social approval? Would it be whatever else? There's a system in place that's designed to support these girls. There is no system in place designed to support these boys. from the setup or the institution itself, the school, that's become a gynocentric environment itself. Systematically, there's no support for these boys. So everything is designed to support the girls. So of course you're going to have poorer outcomes for boys. If you remove their father, first of all, you have a system that emasculates men in this country. It's systematic on a corporate level, the employment level, institutions. Men are legitimately walking on eggshells, many. And then you have a system in schools designed to promote or empower girls. There's really no concentrate. Even in many schools, they're getting rid of physical education or anything. They want to reduce the amount of time the boys get outside play and burn off that education. Mostly female teachers. So you have a systematic system designed mostly around girls and women in the educational system, no support network. And, and so we really have designed this system that produces different outcome and different support system. And you have to look at the psychology of manhood and masculinity itself. And there's certain things that male teachers, not male teachers that are just LGBTQ liberal indoctrinated male teachers, masculine male teachers, which is becoming a thing of the past. And you have feminist teachers and masculine male teachers and more emasculated, well, liberal type male that basically see the world through the lenses of women. We have basically feminist males and feminist women teaching in these schools to teach boys and not deal with in an environment that sees manhood or masculinity as toxic. And you wonder why there's so certain outcomes that come from these boys. So it's really a failed system itself from its design. And that's what we're expecting these boys to thrive in. We're expecting these boys to thrive in. And for those people who cannot afford to put their kids in private school, where there's some level of balance, where you could control the values, you could control the structure of the teachers, you could control what's being taught to your kids. There's a lot of kids that are stuck with this in the public school system. A more liberally indoctrinated, anti-masculine, anti-male environment. So of course you're going to get certain biased outcomes in favor of women because that's systematically designed that way. So let's continue on.
More of a stigma there. Like, I wonder why that's
Shame,
so
they
dramatic.
can't talk about it, aren't comfortable, feel there's a lack. I mean, I think just until a few years ago, the social incentives were to never speak about it.
Right.
I was on Lewis Howe's podcast, and he just openly said, I was sexually abused as a child. And it was so shocking for me.
Wow.
To hear this big, handsome guy.
Yeah.
I don't think he would have said it 10 or 20 years ago. I think people would have assumed that it was his fault. It made him less of a man. So I think a lot of that has hopefully gotten better, but we just have to acknowledge boys mentally and emotionally are weaker than girls.
Lewis House didn't admit that until a couple of years ago.
Is that right?
So he's lived with that his whole life. And
wow.
It wasn't until he was, I think, having dysfunction in his relationships and a few other things had happened that he decided he wanted to say it publicly for the first time, which again feeds into your point. We actually asked some of our audience to write in, and one of the people that wrote in was a teacher in a primary / preschool. And she said to me, she was an anonymous teacher in Germany. And she says, every year it seems like more and more children, always boys, have this new energy to destroy the classroom dynamics. These boys almost always have two things in common: a lack of boundaries at home and unsupervised, unlimited access to all kinds of content on the internet, e.g. porn. Their perception of what is okay and what is right becomes completely distorted. I have tried so many things, and every year it's becoming an even bigger challenge. Young boys in school. So one proposal is to delay education for boys, put them in education later. Is the classroom itself a problem? Like the sitting in school, listening to someone speak at you. Someone proposed to me on this podcast before that boys need more sort of practical play, and the classroom isn't designed for that. I wasn't sure if that was...
Well, in single-sex boys' school, they end up with double the amount of recess time. And that is I equate boys to dogs. A happy dog is a tired dog. And if it's not tired, if it doesn't get to run, it's going to cause trouble. And I feel the same way about boys. So in these schools where they decide what's best for the boys, there's usually more exercise and more free play and more roughhousing, co-ed schools. And you're also seeing, I think with boys, I mean, there's just, by even acknowledging that men play a critical role in boys' lives a few years ago, that was seen as sexist. What you mean? What you're saying? Moms can't do this? And I can just tell you, there are certain moments when my partner needs me to weigh in. I don't know if it's the depth of my voice, my physical size, the way they relate to me, the fact that I'm not. You need dad, or that's what I have found, especially with boys. They need almost like that not physical intimidation, but it's almost like they begin tuning out their mom over time. I mean, they're incredibly close to their mother. They look to her for nurturing. When they really have a problem, I find they go to mom, but they will constantly test the boundaries, constantly. And I think a lot of single mothers, quite frankly, with boys, just can't keep a lid on that kid. They can't control the kid. So, and I think you're finding at schools when there's no male kind of, I don't know, involvement or that I don't know, what I'll call physical presence. And then you add on this DOPA machine that they get used to squeezing a DOPA bag 100 times a day as they need it. And then you take the DOPA bag away, they're just more prone to emotional outbursts. I'm curious if you've done any research around why that is.
Fair use. Let's continue.
Is that emotional outburst more common among boys than girls?
I haven't done that research, but I am imagining that there's moms out there that are raising boys on their own, and they might be like, yes, it is hard, but what do I do?
Right.
And so for that boy who isn't taught by a lot of guys in school and isn't in the Boy Scouts, which doesn't exist anymore, or it doesn't have big brothers, big sisters, like what does that mom do?
So, but that you brought up Boy Scouts in America. There's Scouts for America,
Right.
and it can be boys and girls.
Right.
But Girl Scouts have their own single
Yeah.
sex, but Boy Scouts aren't allowed to have their own
Right.
single sex. So the question is, all right, what do you do? And I think that we need a societal zeitgeist that says immediately, if there's no longer a male involved, we have to get other men involved
Mhm.
and acknowledge that that's not being sexist, that's important that you get men involved. And I think so I came from a single parent household, raised by a single immigrant mother who lived and died as secretary, light of my life. As soon as my dad was gone and then he had to move away for work, she got other men involved in my life. And I had wonderful men involved in my life. I had a stockbroker, neighbor down the hall came in with his girlfriend and said, do you want to go horseback riding? You take me horseback riding. I don't know if men would be comfortable doing that in today's age. So getting men involved in their lives, after school programs, Boy Scouts. I had a lot of wonderful men. I used to go camping, and there were men everywhere involved in my life. And I worried that a lot of those institutions,
Yeah.
and also there's a reticence and a hesitance for men to get involved in a boy's life that isn't theirs, for fear they're going to be perceived as something's wrong with them.
I was thinking that. So if we have less men in the home raising the children, and then we go to school, and the stat says that 72% of teachers in middle school are women as well. There's no men at school either. It's no wonder that boys are struggling so severely at such a young, early age for so many reasons, because one would assume that they're being socialized in the same way as girls. I'm seeing, I've got a mother at home, don't have a father. I've got women at school, don't have male teachers. I mean, that's a controversial thing to say. I'm sure it used to be, but I think people are waking up a little bit now.
We need more male teachers. There's more female fighter pilots per capita than male kindergarten teachers. There's an absence. There are some boys, not some, there are millions of boys in America whose first male role model is a prison guard. Yeah. And there are just no men in their lives. After school programs being canceled, no women, very, very few men, K through 12. Dad's not around. There are literally communities. You read articles about it where it's like, where are the men?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Where are they?
Online.
Doesn't look like they're in work. They're not in college.
The reality is there just aren't, for a lot of reasons, a host of reasons, a lack of male involvement in kids' lives is a big factor leading to this. There are other factors, there's socioeconomic factors, there's biological factors, there's a lack of vocational training, there's outsourcing of many of the jobs that made a man's path to the middle class viable. I mean, you want to talk about the UK, a big problem is the lack of growth.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of income opportunities for a young man who's not exceptional. And what we've seen in the US is essentially, if you look at our economic policies in college, it's never been better to be remarkable. Like if you're in the top 10% of your high school class, you're going to make more money than the top 10% did 10, 20, 30. If you end up at Google, you're going to make a kid at Google who's amazing, computer science degree, can make millions of dollars by the time they're 30. But I can prove to every.
But you know what's funny is like they again, where is the men? It's such a disingenuous question. This is assuming that men are all sitting around watching corn, not being productive. Not that men have been punished severely, shamed, disrespected. And this idea of responsibility without authority, what is the incentive for these men? So you want these men to go take responsibility for the spawn of single parenthood or women that participated in sexual liberation, picking the wrong men to have kids with that won't be a father, or women that have forced the fathers out of these kids' life. You want these men are looking at it like, you want me to come in and help out in this situation that you've created. Where you've alienated a father or intentionally picked the wrong man to be a father. You want me to do this man's job. That's like asking some man to pay another man's debt. Many of the men that you want to come and do the job, many of them are the men that those women would not choose anyhow. Would it just make more sense for those women to choose the right man in the first place? Instead of having men to be cleanup men, to take on the responsibility of other men. It's such a backwards mentality, and it's really the main thing is this culture itself. Asking men to be cleanup men, asking men to do the jobs of men that these women chose to be with, whether it's through sexual liberation or whatever else, or many of these women that have broken up marriages and relationships with men and have created this environment themselves. Let's continue on.
Every one of us, mathematically, the 99% of our children are not in the top 1%. And our economic policies have basically said that school and college is meant to identify a super class of 1%ers that we're going to try and turn into billionaires, instead of figuring out the infrastructure and the programs to ensure the bottom 90 have a shot of being in the top 10. And one of the stats is just around college acceptance. When I applied to UCLA, the acceptance rate was 76%. Now it's 9%. I was unremarkable for whatever reason, prefrontal cortex, single mother, whatever you want to call it. But back then they had the mission and the charge to let in unremarkable kids. And that's no longer the case, because America's superpowers are optimism. And we all believe our kids in that top 1%. And the reality is they're not. Or people think, I like an economy where you can make $1 billion because that's going to be me one day.
Mhm.
So they have ignored the fact that we are crowding more and more prosperity and opportunity into the remarkable. And for me, it comes down to what do we want in America and the UK? Do we want a super class of billionaires, or do we want a society and an operating system that gives unremarkable people a shot of being in the top 10%? It's become winner take all. And we have purposely created a set of economic and educational policies that.
But here's the problem. When we talk about and Edgar Casper, you made a good point. You know what he never see him do? Speak to the men he's speaking at. Facts. Totally agree. But what is unremarkable? Only men can get the label of unremarkable because all women are outstanding. In his world, because what is the unremarkable? The unremarkable is men and this wisdom and this knowledge and how he sees the world. The only underperformers are men. Not that there's some underperforming women with college degrees sitting in cubicles, barely making enough to survive. Loaded with debt. So really, when that's the unremarkable conversation, it has to do with the men. So let's continue on.
Crowd a massive amount of prosperity into the top 1%. And we have opted for it because we believe we have a shot at being in that top 1%.
I love that because I think that the winner takes all applies to a lot of different things. So I bet the top 10% of Americans now are healthier than they've ever been, while the rest of the country
100%.
has never been healthy.
Best
never
healthcare in
been
the
less
world if you're in the
healthy.
top 10%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or in marriages, the top marriages today are the best marriages of all time, yet we have declining marriage rates. So we're nearing the lowest rate of marriage that we've ever had in American history. So most people or fewer people are getting married, but if you're, two college graduates who get married in your 30s, you might have an even stronger bond than people in the past. But that is a small group at the top.
Your marriage has become a luxury item.
Yeah.
If you're in the top quintile of income earning households, you're 75% get married. If you're in the bottom quintile, only 20. If you're in the lower quintile of income earning men, only 1 in 4 chance of getting married.
And this has huge impact on our society because we know that married people are.
Oh, God. Once again, the highest rate of divorce is from college educated women. Again, misleading altogether, misleading information. Everything is based on economics and money for them. Not understanding that the highest rate of divorce now is the great divorce. Not calculating social media, the distractions for the marriages now. So it doesn't matter what education level it is. Divorce itself is high with everybody. Marriages today are incredibly unsuccessful. One, because of the many distractions involved, and this idea of happiness. The idea that marriage, as opposed to happiness being a symptom of our own self and our own self-development, this idea is people are supposed to be happily married. Marriage is a full-time job. It requires work. And who's cashing out of these marriages at 80% rate, which is women. College-educated women are the highest percentage of women getting out of these marriages, getting a divorce, because somehow the sisterhood or their friends are convincing them that they're missing something out here, social media and especially. So this idea of conversation about marriage, like marriage is some type of successful thing nowadays, especially in the Western world, is a fallacy. When the 56% end in divorce, and then you add another 20% for people that are just miserable and happy, just staying together for money. If you look at the statistics on it, we're not talking about a successful institution in modern day in the West, period. And even in many countries, divorces are even high in places like China, places in the East. You know, you places like Thailand, many places, because of the modernization of the culture and the way how people operate with so many distractions, including social media. What I'm trying to say is there ain't nobody really winning today. Maybe a small fraction of a percentage of people that are successfully married, but successful marriages are far and few in between in this modern day with all the distractions that are out here right now. And the divorce rate is high, especially with the great divorce. The elephant in the room that's not being discussed, again, with all these statistical factors being involved, is where is the winning in here for men? Because even a man today that gets into a marriage, all of the things that he must do as a man is enforceable through the state. All of the things a woman has to do is not. And she has the power or the approval of the court of public opinion, the government, um, the family structure, everything around is really supportive of the woman. And no matter what happens in that relationship, the man is going to be held accountable and it's his fault. So we're removing an environment where it's like heavily one-sided in terms of its benefits towards the woman herself. So realistically, this issue is not about men and their inability to really meet these standards, because again, once again, most of the women look everything through the lenses of economics, means that women are only focused on this small percentage of men. But how many men have had access to their bodies that are not a part of the 10% or the 15% in terms of purely economics? So if a woman has slept with 10 guys that were broke thugs, or that were just good looking guys, maybe the bartender or whatever else, what is her husband getting? Or what is this higher earning man getting that's special to him that these other 20 guys or 10 guys did not get? Is the fundamental question you must ask. So again, we're asking for men to be above and beyond and extra special for women that are not bringing anything special or unique to the relationship that have not been experienced before by many men. And what makes these women so much above the ordinary, what makes an average woman making $80,000 above and beyond a man making 70,000? We understand hypergamy, but we're talking about things just in numbers, not in anything that has to do with the actual value in terms of the dating and relationship market. But let's continue on.
They're healthier, they're wealthier, they live longer. When couples are married, they actually have lower rates of child poverty. And so this has huge implications for our society if we're having fewer marriages, especially when you think about having fewer babies.
I want to get into dating and marriage and love and all those things. One of the things that really shocked me as I was preparing for this conversation was this graph, because this isn't the narrative that we hear. Can you both see this one? This is the reverse gender gap.
Oh yeah.
Gender pay gap graph.
Right.
And it shows that young women are now out earning young men. That's not what I heard. In terms of, like, if I log onto social media, we've been trying to fight the gender pay gap, but to see that young men are now falling behind, both in education, both in unemployment. Young men face higher unemployment, nearly twice the rate of women. Looking at the early developmental stats, this graph was horrifying. I actually couldn't believe that was true, that young boys are struggling so much in education, but then to see also that it's reflected in.
So that graph shows that boys aged 16 to 24 are making 10% less in full-time employment than women. And so it is true that we're seeing a reverse income graph. But
Okay, once again, the elephant in the room. even if these men, even for the men that are making more money than these women, the men are still not marrying these women. The men are not marrying these women because it's a raw deal, regardless of what the man's income is. The men are saying, look, this is a terrible deal. Now, the men that women want, well, first of all, many of the women, sorry about that, a little bit of a delay. But again, we're assuming that these guys of any status is lining up for marriage. And that's what the fundamental flaw of this conversation is we're assuming that these guys are, let me remove this from this. Okay, that's a little bit better. All right, here we go. Let's try it this way. Yes, okay. So the fundamental problem that we have with this whole conversation is this assumption that men of any economic status are lining up to marry these women. And that's not true. That could be no further from the truth. Whether a man, there's not a bunch of men just lining up to. I don't know what's going on with my stream here. One second, guys. Maybe the bugs of YouTube is coming to get me. Yeah, stand by for a second, guys. I might have to do this. All right, let's see if this picks up. Hey guys, can you hear me? Hey, put a 1 in the screen if you can hear my voice.